God used you as the narcissist's final warning, but they ignored it. The warning they refused to see. There are moments in life when God places you in someone's path, not as an accident, but as a divine warning. You were not just another person they encountered. You were a messenger, a light, a final sign before judgment fell. But they were too blind, too arrogant, too lost in their own deception to see it. They thought they could manipulate, deceive, and discard without consequence. They mistook your kindness for weakness, your love for foolishness, your patience for permission. They believed they were in control, but God was watching. And now they are starting to realize the cost of their actions. God used you as a test, a mirror, a final opportunity for them to turn away from their destructive path. But they ignored it. Now the weight of their choices is catching up with them, and the reckoning is not far away. So the question is, what happens when someone rejects the warning God sends? They may escape for a season, but justice is already in motion. The price of their defiance will be far greater than they ever imagined. 1. The narcissist's delusion, thinking they were above consequences. The narcissist moves through life with a false sense of invincibility, believing they are immune to consequences. They deceive, manipulate, and discard without a second thought, assuming they will always have the upper hand. They see their actions as isolated, disconnected from any form of accountability. In their mind, power belongs to those who take without hesitation, who exploit without remorse, who silence their conscience in pursuit of their desires. This is the fundamental delusion of the narcissist. They convince themselves that they are above the laws of both men and God. They do not recognize the weight of their choices because for so long they have seen no immediate repercussions. But justice is not always swift. It is patient. It unfolds like a storm forming on the horizon, slowly gathering strength. The narcissist assumes that because judgment has not yet fallen, it never will. They mistake delay for escape. They confuse silence for approval. Yet what they fail to grasp is that God is never mocked. Every seed they have sown, every lie, every betrayal, every act of selfishness is waiting to bear fruit. The scales of justice do not remain unbalanced forever. When the weight of their actions reaches its tipping point, the collapse will come, not in the way they expect, not in the way they can control, but in a way that God Himself has ordained. And here is the greatest irony. They thought they were in control. They thought they were untouchable. They assumed that because they had successfully manipulated, deceived, and used people in the past, they could continue to do so indefinitely. But what they did not realize was that their perceived victories were merely borrowed time. The grace of God had been extending opportunities for them to change, for them to repent. He placed you in their life as a final warning, a test of their character, a chance to turn away from their wickedness. But instead of recognizing this, they doubled down on their arrogance. They rejected the warning, just as Pharaoh hardened his heart against Moses. Just as the people of Noah's time laughed at his message before the flood came, they chose pride over humility, deception over truth, self-worship over repentance. And now, the illusion of their control is beginning to unravel. At first, they do not see it. Judgment does not always arrive with thunder and fire. It often begins with something subtle, a sense of unease, a shift in the air. The first sign that their world is not as stable as they believed. People begin to see through their deception. The relationships they relied upon start to crack. The power they once wielded no longer produces the same results. What once came easily now feels strained, forced. This is the beginning of the fall. But the narcissist, still blinded by their arrogance, refuses to acknowledge it. They cling to the belief that they can outmaneuver, outthink, and outlast the inevitable. But they are wrong, because no one escapes the justice of God. No one manipulates their way past the laws He has set in motion. The very system they built to control others will become the trap that ensnares them. The respect they demanded will turn into isolation. The people they discarded will move on, and when they reach for replacements, they will find that nothing measures up. The very lies they used to construct their world will become the weight that collapses it. And when that moment comes, when they finally realize the truth, it will be too late. They will stand in the ruins of their own making, looking back at the opportunities they rejected, the warnings they ignored, the people they mistreated, and the most painful realization of all, they did it to themselves. 2. The role you played, a divine messenger. Have you ever wondered why God placed you in their life? Why were you the one who had to endure their manipulation, their cruelty, their betrayal? Why were you the one who saw through their deception, who recognized the brokenness behind their facade, who tried to offer them love, patience, and guidance? It was not a coincidence. You were sent. God does not place his people in the lives of the wicked by accident. He does not allow his children to walk through fire without a purpose. You were a warning. You were a test. You were the last chance before judgment. But they could not see it. Throughout Scripture, God sends his messengers to offer people a final opportunity to turn from their wicked ways. Noah warned the people before the flood. Moses stood before Pharaoh with God's command to release his people. Jonah was sent to Nineveh to call them to repentance. Jesus himself walked among the Pharisees, offering salvation before destruction came upon Jerusalem. And now, in a modern world that believes it is beyond divine accountability, God still sends his messengers, not in the form of prophets on mountaintops, but in the form of ordinary people with extraordinary purposes. People like you. You were not just another person they encountered. You were the mirror they refused to look into, the voice of reason they ignored, the reminder that their actions had consequences. You represented grace, love, and patience, everything they claimed to want but were unwilling to accept. They saw in you something they could not understand, a heart untouched by their games, a soul connected to something greater, a light they could not extinguish. And so, rather than receive the gift that God offered through you, they did what narcissists always do. They rejected it. But their rejection does not erase the truth. It does not undo the fact that God used you to reveal their flaws, to call them to change, to show them a different way. They ignored the warning, but that does not mean the warning was not given. And now, as the dust settles, as time moves forward, as their world begins to shift in ways they never anticipated, they will remember you. They will recall the words you spoke, the patience you extended, the love you tried to give, and the most haunting realization of all, you were their chance, you were their test, and they failed. This is the part they never considered. They assumed they could treat you however they wanted and move on without repercussions. They thought they could manipulate, discard, and forget. But the problem with rejecting a divine warning is that God is still watching. And when you reject his messengers, you are not just rejecting a person, you are rejecting God himself. They thought they were playing a game. They thought they had the upper hand. They thought they could walk away without consequence. But now they are starting to realize you were never just a person in their life, you were a warning. And that warning is now unfolding exactly as God intended. Comment below with the words, "I was the warning," if you know God placed you in someone's life as their final chance, but they ignored it. 3. The consequences they never expected. When someone rejects a warning from God, they are not just turning away from a person, they are turning away from divine protection. At first, they feel victorious. They assume they have won because there are no immediate consequences. They move forward in arrogance, convinced that life will continue as it always has. But what they fail to realize is that God's justice is not always immediate. but it is always inevitable. The consequences do not arrive with flashing lights or dramatic declarations. They begin silently, like a slow unraveling of everything they once held together. At first it is subtle, small shifts in their life that they barely notice. The people who once admired them now keep their distance. The opportunities they took for granted seem to dry up. The sense of control they prided themselves on begins to slip through their fingers. But then the emptiness sets in. They start to recognize that something is missing, but they cannot quite name it. They try to fill the void with distractions, new relationships, new ambitions, new indulgences, but nothing satisfies. No matter how hard they try to replace what they lost, they cannot. Because the truth is, they didn't just lose you. This is what narcissists and manipulators never understand. When God places a blessing in your life and you discard it, you do not walk away unscathed. You walk away with a deficit that nothing can replace. They assumed that your patience, your love, your loyalty were just common things they could find again. But now, as they search for substitutes, they realize the weight of what they lost. They mocked you, but now they feel the absence of your presence. They dismissed you, but now they crave the stability you brought. They treated you as replaceable, but now they understand that what they lost was one of a kind. At first, they try to ignore it. They silence the thoughts. They tell themselves it does not matter. But regret is a shadow that follows closely behind those who reject God's warning. It whispers to them in the quiet moments, in the stillness of the night, in the spaces where they once felt secure. And as time passes, the weight of their choices grows heavier, and then, one day, the realization fully hits them. They see it all. Their pride, their foolishness, their mistakes. They remember every opportunity they had to change, every moment when they could have chosen a different path. And when they look back, they see you. They see the warning they ignored, the test they failed, the moment when God gave them a choice, and they chose wrong. And here's the painful truth. By the time they recognize what they lost, it is far too late to get it back. 4. They thought they could replace you, but they were wrong. At first, they didn't even hesitate. In their mind, you were just another person, another name, another chapter they could close without consequence. People like them never pause to consider the weight of their actions, because they have spent their entire lives believing that relationships are replaceable, that loyalty is an illusion, and that the world will always offer them more chances, more people, more opportunities to do as they please. They thought walking away from you was their victory. They thought discarding you was a decision made from a place of power. They assumed that what they lost was insignificant, because they had convinced themselves that someone better, easier, more compliant would come along to fill the space. But they were wrong. It didn't happen all at once. At first they were satisfied, maybe even relieved. They believed they had won, that they had made the right choice, that letting you go was a step forward, not a step toward destruction. They walked away without looking back, convinced that life would go on as they had designed it. They were arrogant enough to believe that their choices dictated reality, that their perspective was the only one that mattered. They assumed that because they had convinced themselves that you were replaceable, it must be true. But what they failed to understand, what they will now be forced to learn, is that when you throw away something God has given you, there is no replacement. It starts slowly, subtly. At first, they don't notice the shift. They continue as if nothing has changed, surrounding themselves with distractions, pursuing new relationships, indulging in the same reckless behaviors. But then, something happens. They meet new people, only to find that the depth of connection they had with you is nowhere to be found. The trust they took for granted is no longer available to them. The support, the understanding, the patience. They search for it in others, but it is never quite the same. They try to recreate what they had, But what they lost was never just a relationship. It was a divine presence in their life, and that cannot be replicated. This is the moment they never saw coming. They thought they could walk away without consequence. They believed that time would erase their actions, that new people would take your place, that life would go on exactly as it always had. But reality does not cater to their delusions. Reality operates under the laws of God, and when you mistreat a blessing, when you discard something sacred, you do not get it back. At first they try to ignore it. They dismiss the feeling of unease. They tell themselves they don't care. But regret is persistent. It does not ask for permission. It does not wait for an invitation. It shows up unannounced, in the silence of the night, in the quiet moments when they are left alone with their thoughts. And when it comes, it brings clarity. The realization hits them with a force they never expected. They did not just lose you, they lost the favor that came with you. This is the part that will haunt them the most, because deep down they will recognize that they had something rare and they destroyed it. They will remember the patience you extended to them, the way you forgave when they didn't deserve it, the way you stood by them when anyone else would have walked away. They will recall every moment when they had a choice to do right by you, every opportunity they had to change, every time they ignored the warning that God placed in front of them, and they will come to the most painful realization of all. By the time they finally understand what they had, it is too late to get it back. They will try. They will test the waters, leaving hints, looking for ways to reconnect, trying to see if there is still an opening. But what they do not understand is that when God removes someone from your life, He does not intend for them to return. They thought they were making a decision, but in reality, God was making a decision too. He saw what you could not see, He heard what you did not hear, and when the time was right, He removed you, not as a punishment to you, but as a judgment on them. Now they are left with a void that cannot be filled. They will search for you in every person they meet, but they will never find another you. They will try to replicate what they had, but what they lost was never just a person. It was the presence of God's favor. And now that presence has left them, and they are left to face the consequences of their own choices, alone. 5. The final realization. Too late to turn back. Regret is a cruel teacher, arriving not when it is convenient, but when it is unbearable. At first they do not recognize it. They distract themselves, convincing themselves that life will go on as it always has. They pursue new relationships, new indulgences, new escapes, believing that whatever they lost can be replaced. They tell themselves that their choices were justified, that their actions had no real impact, that walking away was the right decision. But no one escapes the truth forever. At night, when the distractions fade, the weight begins to settle. It starts as a whisper, a fleeting thought, a quiet discomfort. They dismiss it at first, pushing it aside like they pushed you aside. But it does not disappear. It lingers in the silence, growing heavier with each passing day. The realization does not come all at once. It arrives in pieces, in moments they never expected. A familiar phrase, a certain kindness from a stranger, a situation that forces them to remember you, and then the truth strikes them with full force. They lost something irreplaceable. They assumed you would always be there, that your presence in their life was an entitlement rather than a gift. They believed they could discard you and move forward without consequence. But now they see the emptiness left behind. They thought they were in control, but control was always an illusion. They believed they were making the decisions, but in reality they were being given a test, and they failed. Now, there is no undoing what has been done. There is no returning to what once was. They will try, of course. They will look for ways to reconnect, to rewrite the past, to regain what they threw away so carelessly. But what they do not understand is that when God removes someone from your life, it is not a temporary lesson. It is a final judgment. This is what they never anticipated. The very thing they dismissed is now the thing they crave. The very presence they mocked is now the absence that torments them. The peace they once took for granted is now unattainable, no matter how desperately they search for it. They will never say it out loud. Their pride will not allow them to admit the depth of their regret, but in the quiet moments, when no one is watching, when they are left alone with their thoughts, they will feel the full weight of what they lost. They will look back and see every opportunity they had to change, every moment they could have done things differently, every time they ignored the warning that God placed in front of them. And the most painful part, by the time they understand, it is far too late to turn back. This is their judgment, not fire from the sky, not an immediate downfall, but something far worse, a life lived in the shadow of what could have been. The knowledge that they were given a chance, a path, a blessing, and they walked away from it. They will carry this regret, not for a moment, but for a lifetime, because some losses cannot be undone. Some doors once closed never open again. And when they finally see the truth, they will realize the punishment was never external. It was the life they now have to live without you. 6. Your victory, walking away without looking back. There is a point in life where you stop waiting for an apology that will never come. Stop wondering if they will ever change. Stop looking back at the wreckage they created and start focusing on the path God has set before you. It is the moment when you finally realize that their regret is not your responsibility, their suffering is not your burden, and their downfall is not your concern. They made their choice. They ignored the warning. They believed they could discard you without consequence. But now, as they sit in the reality of their own destruction, you are walking away, free, unshackled, untouchable. This is what they never expected. In their mind, you were supposed to wait, suffer, break under the weight of their absence. They thought they had the power, that they were the ones who determined your worth, that their validation was something you needed. But here is the truth they never considered. You were never the one who was losing anything. It was always them. God has a way of removing people not as a punishment to you, but as a revelation of their true nature. He let them show you who they really were. He let them expose their deceit, their selfishness, their inability to love, and then, when their true colors were undeniable, He pulled you away, not to hurt you, but to protect you. The storm they now face is not your concern. The emptiness they feel is not your responsibility. The loneliness that follows them is not your burden to carry. There is no reason to look back. What God has removed is never meant to be retrieved. When Lot's wife looked back, she turned into a pillar of salt, not because the past was worth longing for, but because God does not call His people to return to what He has already delivered them from. You were never meant to stay in the place of suffering, waiting for someone to wake up and see your worth. Your worth was never tied to their recognition of it. Your destiny was never dependent on their ability to appreciate it. Your future was never in their hands. This is the victory they never saw coming. Not that you got revenge, not that you proved them wrong, not that you sought to make them regret their actions. Your victory is that you moved forward without them. While they sit in the ruins of their own choices, haunted by what they lost, you are rising, you are healing, you are stepping into the life God has for you, untouched by their mistakes. And that is the greatest justice of all. 7. The truth of God's justice. Justice is a force that cannot be escaped. It moves silently, unseen, undetected, until the moment it is revealed. Those who betray others, who manipulate and deceive, who discard good people without thought, convince themselves that they are above consequence. They believe they have mastered life, that they can take without giving, destroy without suffering loss, and that somehow justice will never reach them. But justice is already at work. whether they believe in it or not. They mistake God's patience for his absence. Because judgment does not fall instantly, they assume it never will. They see no immediate repercussions and convince themselves that their actions have no weight. But justice is not always swift. It is precise. God does not bring judgment in haste. He allows people to move deeper into their own deception, to continue on their path, to build higher and higher on a foundation of lies, not realizing that the higher they climb, the greater the fall will be when the collapse comes. At first, life continues as if nothing has changed. They go about their days believing they have won. They assume they have secured their future, that walking away from you was a choice made without consequence. They are convinced that what they discarded was insignificant, that whatever role you played in their life could easily be filled by someone else. They believe that they have moved on, but reality does not bend to their arrogance. Slowly, without warning, justice begins its work. It does not always arrive in ways they expect. Sometimes it comes in the form of emptiness, a realization that something is missing, but they cannot quite identify what it is. The people who once admired them now seem distant. The validation they once thrived on no longer satisfies. Their distractions become hollow. The control they once wielded so effortlessly now feels forced, unstable. They reach for the same power they once had over others, but it no longer holds. What once came easily now feels like a struggle. The world they built for themselves begins to crumble, piece by piece. At first they do not recognize it as justice. They blame circumstances, bad luck, or other people. They refuse to see the connection between their suffering and their actions. But the truth is inescapable. They planted the seeds of their own downfall long before it began. They ignored the warnings. They dismissed the truth. They believed they could act without consequence. And now that illusion is breaking. And then the regret comes. It creeps in at night, in the moments of silence, in the spaces where their pride cannot protect them. It does not come as a single thought, but as a flood of realization. They remember you. They remember what they had and how they threw it away. They recall every moment when they could have chosen differently, every warning sign they ignored, every time they mistook patience for weakness, kindness for naivety, love for something that could be easily replaced. They look back, and suddenly they see it all. The respect they took for granted, the loyalty they discarded, the peace they mistook for nothing. They see your presence as it truly was, not as something ordinary, but as a gift they will never receive again. And the most painful realization of all, they cannot undo what has been done. They may try, they may attempt to reach out, to test the waters, to find a way back into your life. But what they fail to understand is that when God removes someone from your life, it is not a temporary separation, it is a final judgment. What they lost was not just you. They lost the favor that came with you, the grace that was extended to them through you, the presence of God's blessing that they never recognized until it was gone. This is justice, not fire from the sky, not immediate destruction, but something far worse. Justice is knowing exactly what you lost and realizing that you will never get it back. It is living in the shadow of what could have been. It is carrying the weight of your own decisions for the rest of your life. This is what they never saw coming. And you will not even have to witness it. You will not need to see their regret, hear their apology, or watch their downfall. God's justice does not require your participation. Your victory was never in proving them wrong. It was never in seeking revenge. Your victory was in walking away and letting God handle what was always His to judge. They thought they were the ones making the choices, but God was always in control. And now, as they sit in the wreckage of their own creation, they will finally understand what they ignored, what they rejected, and what they lost. But by the time they understand, it will be far too late, because no one escapes the justice of God. What was done in arrogance will be answered for in full.